in a dark closet somewhere. That's what I mean by intelligible. The universe is intelligible, it's not random. And this is true about both God the Father and God the Son, without revisiting any of the specifics of last week. And until you really put that in its proper context, it's something that's easy to be glossed over. But remember, so our Catholic doctrine of creation, the idea that creation was done out of nothing, from nothing, contemplates an intelligible created universe, not an eternal universe, done by God before there was time or space. And it was done via the Son, the Logos, right? The first line of the first chapter of John's Gospel. So, last week, in a word, we discussed the way that one can use the intelligibility of the creation ex nihilo to make claims about God the Father and to make claims about God the Son, right? I mean, that's just sort of what we did last week. But this week, what we're going to talk about is the reflexive side of the equation here. So we said from creation, the fact that it's intelligible, we can make claims about Christ and his Father. But this week, we're going to focus on medieval philosophy, specifically high medieval philosophy, scholastic philosophy, which is, the real doctrine of the church. So when I admonished you to take a look at this book, the first 50 pages of this book, this is just classic Catholic theology. The first 50 pages are pure St. Thomas, pure high scholastic, University of Paris, circa 1200 AD, where, as I told you last week, you had Jewish Aristotelians, Christian Aristotelians, and Muslim Aristotelians making theological arguments based on Aristotle and making them back and forth in such a way that they all had a common parlance and they could all make sense of it. This book's first 50 pages, I suggest, is just the Christian version of the Aristotelian. But so last week, we talked about the idea that being is intelligible. Well, from this being, we can look around and we can use our own brains, which are part of creation, part of the Logos, who, remember, is Christ, in and whom the world was made through. We can use that to make claims about Christ the Son and God the Father. And that's really the meaning of Yahweh, I am who I am. We talked about that, remember? So last week was by far, I think, the most dense because I had to throw all this stuff against the wall and just make sure that we had a terminological basis by which we can move forward. This week, we're just going to take all of that and we're going to say now, the Catholic doctrine of creation and the idea that the Lord is good. He looked at his creation and he saw that it was good. So that means it's intelligible and it's a solid basis for us to use our brains. He's not pitting us against science and philosophy. So that's what I'm saying. This week, we're going to not talk about the God and Christ attribution side. We're going to list attributes of creation itself. That's what the medievals were concerned with. And this is called something specific, natural theology. And there are several Protestants out there who have literally said, like Ned Flanders or something, that it's from the devil, natural theology. They say it's attempting to make claims about God that God did not give us in Scripture. So remember this doctrine we talked about last week. The central unifying theme of Protestantism. Of course, the joke is there are several solas at the end of the day, but they're limited in their capacity to use sola, even if at the end of the day they're not limited by the strictness of the term. There's sola scriptura, sola fide. Those are the main ones. So they suggest that natural theology, making simple claims about creation and God, vis-a-vis their reflexive relationship to one another, is diabolical, because it makes claims about God when his back is turned, so to speak, to borrow Karl Barth's term. Well, if it doesn't come out of Scripture, if it's not Christ on the cross, which is the point of Scripture, then this is God, this is a false revelation, looking around, looking at the world, seeing that how intricately things are ordered. Atoms comprise cells. Cells know how to divide of their own accord. There are hundreds of types of cells, and everything has a special place and works well. It's not just chaos, it's order. We're not going to touch that, and therefore, as you'll see by the end of tonight and early next lecture, this is why the Protestants have a really fundamental problem with science on their hands. And it's not slurs. I told you, most of my friends are Protestants. Most of my friends in academia are Protestant. But it's undeniable. They have a problem with philosophy, because philosophy pushes forward. And they have a problem with science, and that's why every few months you hear an ongoing debate, evolution or creation. Of course, we're kind of standing not in the middle, but somewhere between them, and saying we alone have the solution here. That's because of natural theology and our medieval background. Incidentally, the medieval period, the late medieval period, is the most unduly slandered and slurred epoch there's ever been in the recorded history of man. People talk about it like it was still cavemen, but there's a higher degree of intellectual rigor than it is today, easily. And I'll try to tell you, as far as it's relevant, some further bit about the debates at Paris when young St. Thomas was dragged there by his mentor. He was studying upwards of like 16 hours a day, and even when he wasn't studying, reports just constant debates between all these people studying these rigorous texts. So, a couple things. For the subject of tonight, not too many more terms, but one, the term creatures. I always thought this was funny when I was studying in Rome. It just means a created thing. Since we're going to be talking more about creation and the doctrines that follow from creation, we talk about creation as having this binary relation. On the one side, a creator, and anything that's created is a creature. So you don't have to think of a swamp creature or anything like that. We use the term in an idiosyncratic way. And the final note, by way of making reference to intelligibility over against understandability. What are some other rough and ready synonyms for reasonability? The difference between these synonyms, they're all basically good placeholders, is that intelligibility means it's something you're taking into your intellectus, which again, we're not going to get into this, but to a scholastic thinker like Thomas, the intellectus was distinct from the ratio, the reason. And so it was a loaded term. To say that the universe is intelligible means a little more than just that, well, things tend to be reasonable. A text can be reasonable. So for the Protestants who reject natural theology, you can read the Bible, it can be reasonable. But remember, at center of what I'm trying to get you to see is, anytime you read a text and you deem, well, that was reasonable, that's plausible, that could happen, that probably did happen, or that's pure fiction, and even at that level, that's bad fiction versus this is good fiction. You're superimposing over the text something that is extrinsic to it, right? I mean, I've failed to really impart any subtlety when dealing with these topics if I don't successfully impart that. Sola scriptura, the ultimate teaching of the Protestants, can never be, because the second a single reader reads a text and says, the Bible is very compelling, I'm going to become a Protestant Christian. That happens all the time because ultimately the Protestant